Hello and welcome to RUACH. I am Pastor John Niketh from First Lutheran Church in Lynn, and it's a delight to be invited into your living room this afternoon. RUACH is a Hebrew word which means spirit or breath of God, but for us it stands for religious understanding and community harmony. And I'm joined by my colleague, who may introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Margie Klein Ronkin with the Essex County Community Organization.
And you'll see on the screen that it says our topic is nature. However, we're going to expand that a little bit. It's the summertime, and part of what we do in the summertime is spend time in nature, and that's part of our how we find rest and restoration as human beings, as children of God, connecting back to the things that give us life and meaning and help us step back from the busyness of the world and to remember why we're here, why this all matters, and where we're going. And so there's just two of us today, so it'll be a shorter program, but let's think about how we rest and recharge, and how does that connect with what we believe. I think of many times, at least in the Gospels, where Jesus was very intentional about stopping, where he was surrounded by a crowd, where he, the energy was coming out of him, and he just took time to go be by himself and pray. And it's interesting that, I always thought it was interesting that the Gospels included that little detail. It would have been very easy to leave that out, what Jesus did in his downtime, just record the action of the stories. But to mention on many occasions that Jesus took time to, sometimes it says to be in prayer or just to rest, to have a meal, that was, the authors of the Gospels thought it was important that we be reminded of that even the Son of God needed rest. We heard the story in the lectionary two Sundays ago about where Jesus heals on the Sabbath, which of course outrages some of the crowd, and it was going against the tradition of, or the prohibition rather, of working on the Sabbath. But I often think today, if Jesus were alive with us, we would have the opposite. We'd be outraged if he took a day off. Like we would say, how dare he be such a slouch? What is he doing, just sitting there doing nothing? He should be out there healing people, preaching sermons. He should be out there, what does he think he is, a freeloader? So do you encounter this in your ministry as well? This constant busyness equals godliness?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Jewish tradition and culture really has both. Like, our foundation story of the creation of the world includes that God created the world in 6 days and then God rested, which I think is just a really radical notion that God would rest. I mean, isn't God doing something all the time? And the idea that God would rest and we're supposed to be God-like. The number one command of how we're supposed to be godlike is that we're supposed to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy because God rested and God created the world and then God rested, and in a way all week long we're creating or co-creating our world, and then we need time to rest. And yet I think particularly I think this is true in our society in general. And then I also think, like, just in the Jewish community, based on bad things that have happened to us, that there's this sense of, like, we have to work really hard and prove ourselves to make sure that things are going to be okay. Like, first of all, we have to work really hard because our identity is defined by our jobs and our status, which is not what I think it should be. And then two is our worth. Like, we are only worth something if we're being productive. Whereas I would say from a religious standpoint, we are of infinite value because we're created in the image of God. And, one thing one of my rabbinical school professors, Rabbi Evan Leader, used to say to me is, people often think, oh, I need to have Shabbat or Sabbath to recharge so that I can do a really good job during the week. And he said, what if actually what you're doing is all week you're working so that you have the centeredness to be able to move on to closeness with God on Shabbat. And he said it to me in the context where I was always late for synagogue because I was so tired from working so hard that I just needed to sleep in. And he said, what if you made your life balanced in such a way that when it came time, you could worship as much as possible? And I thought, yeah, that's an interesting idea. And yet it's one that I think is so challenging in our modern times.
I just love that because it just turns upside down, rather than, because we say the same thing a lot, that worship recharges us for the week and et cetera, et cetera. And to imagine that, no, what if that is the center of the week, that the Lord's Day or that our Sabbath day, our communion with God and each other, that's the high point, and everything else builds up to that. And if that's being compromised, then something's out of balance.
Right. And in Judaism, Shabbat is supposed to be a remembrance of two things. One is the creation of the world that resulted in the Garden of Eden, and two is the Exodus from Egypt. And in sort of Jewish mythology, Shabbat is a taste of the world to come, and the world to come, which is kind of like heaven, is an echo of the Garden of Eden. Yeah. So it's like, may things be as they once were again in days of old. So, so Shabbat is this time where we have space to imagine what our fullest humanity could be like. And it's, who we could be, what our world could be like. And then during the week, we work to create that vision. And there's a story, a legend in Midrash or rabbinic legend that when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, of course, they didn't get time off. Yeah. They were slaves. That's the point of it. But they had these secret scrolls, and they would read the scrolls, and the scrolls talked about this thing called Shabbat, this day of rest. And they would read about Shabbat, and whenever any of their taskmasters would find out about it, they would confiscate it, but they would continue to have the practice of reading about Shabbat. And as I understand, the purpose of that story was to say that just the idea of Shabbat and that there could be time off is a radical idea about human freedom that says who we are is not about our work, it's about who we are. And so even for slaves that didn't get any time off, just knowing that there's the idea of time off and that that's what they should have, that gave them a promise of what life could be like that was deeply threatening to an unjust empire. And so to think about that in today's world of what are the ways that we can create leisure time that's not just time off or just time to recharge our batteries so we can go do stuff, but what does it mean to create a really fulfilling time that reminds us of God's presence in the world or reminds us of who we most deeply are?
Yeah, the connection to slavery, I think, is because the very definition of a slave is someone whose humanity has been taken away. And that's essentially what we do when we make someone into a machine. That when we're defined by our work only, by what we produce, we are not seeing the full humanity of that person. We are seeing them as an asset or commodity that produces an outcome for us. Or if we see ourselves that way, that's very harmful. There's a sense that, we need this weekly reminder that even if, before we bring anything to the table, before anybody looks at our accomplishments, we are good enough and loved and valid. And it sounds like that's kind of the same idea, that not just being something that gives us the ability to go out and do work, but something that says you have value before you do any work, which has implications for so many things in our society. When we talk about who's worthy or unworthy of a voice at the table or of services or of whatever, well, what are they, we make some sort of mental assessment of what they're contributing to society based on this capitalistic sort of measure, the love or light they bring into the world, but their net worth or the hours that they've worked under employment. So,
and I think that's true. You know, I feel like some people, there's all these movies out there that say, well, money isn't the only important thing. But I think that we still often create other measures like, okay, well, who's the person that's the most connected in the congregation, or who's the person that's doing the most charitable work. And even if it's a good deed, there's still a sense that it's a deed, and the deed is what is our value, as opposed to saying just being ourselves in the act of resting, that could be valuable and holy. Well, that's a very different way of understanding the world. And I have to be honest, for myself, it's hard. I feel like I grew up in such a pressure cooker world in New York City that the idea, you know, I'm about to have a baby and have maternity leave and making some choices about, will I have, you know, how will I have 50 hours a week of contracted work, or 30 hours or 40 or whatever, and just to decide, I want to spend some time with my family and I'm not going to work the most possible. It feels like I'm being mischievous, or like, you know, I'm being a bad girl because I've always been expected to work. Yeah. And the idea that rest, I mean, first of all, motherhood is work, so I don't want to like get rid of that. But to say that like creating spaciousness in your life is not just laziness, but might create the openness for new ideas, new activities, revelations to come through, that is so different than the work messages that we get all the time.
Yeah. Sometimes people will ask me, what do you do on your day off?
Yeah.
I'll say, sometimes I do absolutely nothing. Like day out, that doesn't mean, it's almost like, well, if you're going to get a day off, then you should fill it with chores, you should be doing yard work, you should be doing groceries, all this stuff. It's like, that's not rest.
Right.
Sometimes just laying on the couch and listening to music is a holy thing. Yeah. And that's a way to sort of encounter God in a sense of peace, and that's not being lazy. The stigma of the word lazy is really rampant in our, and it's used in a very pejorative way and with racial and all kinds of other implications. And you know, and I think sometimes we measure hard work by the number of hours that we work. That, you know, there was a time when a 40-hour work week was a hard day's work, right? That was good. Now people are embarrassed to say they work only 40 hours a week. That 50, and somehow it's virtuous. Well, I work 15 hours a day, and we're supposed to. Oh man, you are amazing. You're incredible.
Competitive workaholism.
And you know, it's. I don't know. I know why. Well, so here's something that when I have this conversation with my congregation, there's sometimes a little pushback saying, well, you don't understand, in order to put food on the table, in order to pay rent, in order to, like, we don't have the luxury of just taking this time off. And there's this risk of coming across in this sort of classist sort of way that, you know, telling people to take time that they don't have. When really, I mean, at least in my view, the idea of taking rest or taking Sabbath shouldn't be something we shame people with, like, you need to, but it should critique the system in a sense, that we shouldn't see it as normal or good that we have to live this way. If we live in a world where an honest day's work doesn't pay the bills, where we have to, the promise of college is only available if you do 27 extracurricular activities, where, you know, wages are so low, costs are so high, they have to work 2 and 3 jobs. We should, as people of faith, we should have a comment on that. Like, we should not be complicit in that and say, that's not normal. That's not good or healthy. And maybe maybe not everybody can take that time, but in the world to come, in the
Right.
what Jesus called the reign of God, and whatever we're moving towards, that should be the goal.
Right. And to know it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, one thing I really appreciate in the Jewish community and tradition is that religious Jews have Shabbat. And so when we say we have the weekend, it's like we have Shabbat and then another day. And so on Shabbat, people often think it's you don't work, but that's actually sort of a mischaracterization. It's that you don't do the actions that the Israelites did when they were building the tabernacle, because that's like God rested after creating a home for us, aka the world, and we rest after creating a home for God, aka the tabernacle. So there's 39 categories of things we don't do. And I mean, work is generally something you're not supposed to do, but as a rabbi, that feels pretty confusing since, you know,
Sure.
we're working on, you know, my work is leading the congregation. So anyway, I don't, and my whole community in general, we don't write, we don't spend money, we don't travel. The only travel we do is to either nothing, or just walking around, or to synagogue and back. Like we only are traveling for religious purposes. We don't do phones, we don't do email, we don't do we don't watch TV. So basically we are having authentic face-to-face experiences. And if you're in a Jewish community, when I started becoming more observant, I wasn't really connected to a Jewish community, so it was very isolating. It just felt like all these, don't do this, don't do this.
Sure.
But once I realized those requirements actually lead you to need community, so I'm in a community now where, you know, it's like, oh, what's happening on Friday night? What's happening on Shabbat lunch? And so, you know, people are walking to each other's houses and eating and singing and going for walks in nature. And, you know, there's just a whole set of things. And it means that on Sunday, that I have to do all the other things I didn't get done, but it's protected. That Saturday or Friday night to Saturday is protected. And I remember one of my first jobs out of college, I worked as one of those people that stood on the street and says, "Hi, do you have a moment for Greenpeace?" and tried to get them to give money, and which I thought was going to be horrible. I actually didn't mind it. It was really great talking to people on the street. But anyway, of all the 70 offices around the country that had this type of fundraising work, with lots of people in each of the offices, but also 2 directors in each office, I was the only one that took a day off a week.
Wow.
Out of at least 140 key staff people, I was the only one. And everyone was like, well, we don't know if you're gonna be able to do the job because it's a 7-day-a-week job. And I was like, well, you know, I'll try. If I can't do it, whatever. And I'm not trying to talk myself up, but I wound up fundraising the most of anyone in the country, and my office had the highest fundraising average of anyone in the country. And one of the things that of any office in the country, and one of the things that we did as an office with like nobody else, most people weren't Jewish, is I would have Shabbat dinner and encourage people to take the day off. And people were like, we don't understand. We don't understand what is the secret magic you're doing on the street that would allow this? And I think for me, it was that I was more sane and grounded because I was keeping my humanity through Shabbat.
Yep.
And so was my team, that my team had community and was taking its time. And in a way, that might be an example of just the recharging to be able to work. But it is true that like living that kind of life is a choice that can be valuable and can actually have an impact on the rest of your time. So when people say like, oh, it's not possible because I have too much work, it's like there are lots of people who have made that choice and have made it work. It seems to me like part of it is an indictment of the system, that no one should have to feel like that, but also I think it does have to do with prioritizing and understanding that like we do have the choice to take that time, or even maybe to have a little bit less, but to have that spaciousness one day a week.
There was a book called Real Good Church by Molly Finney Baskett. She used to be a minister in Somerville. And in the section around keeping Sabbath, she says, we don't take Sabbath rest because we have everything done and have spare time.
Yeah.
We take it because we need to stop. And we were made to stop. And if we don't stop, we're going to burn out. And I just love that line because there's always going to be more to do. There's always going to be something else we could do at that time. We don't take the time because we have a surplus of time. We take it because we're human beings,
Right.
not machines. And you know, there's wisdom in the tradition. You know, the from the beginning, that people need to have this time to reconnect and to recharge and to reconnect to God and to each other and to these practices. That it's not, these aren't arbitrary rules, you know, that someone came
Right.
up with.
I'm just thinking of, in the Exodus story, I only noticed that, I'm sure I've always read it, but the whole interchange between Moses and Pharaoh initially is that Moses says, my people need to go on a three-day vacation. And it's like, no. Okay, well then we're leaving. But there's the first ask is not just let my people go and be completely free or become servants of God. It's we need to go on a 3-day vacation so that we can go worship. And just to think about that, there's a whole key story in our tradition comes from the sense of like, we need to affirm our humanity and take time off. So one question I have for you is, I feel like there's Sabbath and then there's like vacation or times that are bigger. And I'm just wondering, what do you find, when you have a longer period of time, like what do you find meaningful? And I think sometimes everyone thinks it's like everyone wants the same kind of vacation. And it's just been interesting to me to learn how like that does not seem true.
I feel like there are different kinds of vacations. So like when I got married last year, we were going on our honeymoon. We tried to find the least complicated, least involved, like no itinerary, no, you got to be here at this time. And so we just spent a week in Chicago, which may not sound exotic at all, and it wasn't, and it was perfect. Like we got up when we wanted to, we ate good food, we went to museums and lounged around. It was just this very relaxing, good time. I would also take a vacation, like if I wanted to have an experience, like I'd like to experience Iceland or the Holy Land. Like that would be great, but it probably wouldn't be like Sabbath. It wouldn't be relaxing.
Right.
It would be, I would need a vacation from the vacation at the other end. When I take vacations and go home to like where my family is from, those are almost kind of like pilgrimages in a sense of you eat at the old pizza place, you go to the old bar, like sort of reconnecting with your roots in a way and checking in with the same people. And that's like almost a whole other kind of category of trip, which is really important to me too. So yeah, it's not that one is better than the other, but they're sort of, they play different role, they fulfill different needs.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. Like, I think, so on my husband and my honeymoon, we went to Nepal, which honestly, I wish we had done nothing in Chicago. But, you know, there's a part of me that has this desire to see the world and see the 7 wonders. And so, you know, we were in the Himalayas and we saw Mount Everest and, I mean, from a plane, but we didn't climb it. But anyway, you know, it was really amazing, but it was exhausting. And after all the planning of the wedding, I was like, once I was there, I was like, why am I climbing this mountain? I just want to do nothing. And so now that I'm pregnant and we've been thinking about what to do over the summer, we just decided to go, we're going to go stay in a place in Western Mass that's just kind of hang out and, you know, we can go for a walk and they have a pool and a lake. You know, there's stuff to do, but it's not like you have to go out and do things. Yeah. And for me, that's what I need right now, and just to appreciate that I have within me different needs. But also, I realized, like, when I was talking with my husband about what kinds of things he wanted to do, his entire priority is, like, to spend time with me and our daughter and to have, like, quiet. Whereas for me, I'm like, I want to see people, so I want to go visit people, and that's really nourishing for me. Whereas for him, he likes people, but that's not vacation.
Right.
Versus my best friend, she is like, I 10 things a day itinerary every day. She wants to explore all the time. And I sometimes get really tired following her schedule,
Yeah.
but for her, that's really meaningful. And I think part of what that means is that rest is not one size fits all, or renewal
Yeah.
is not one size fits all. It's not just about sleeping enough or exercising.
That's a
It's
good
about
point.
what is it that you need to become whole again.
In a sense, this is like what the Myers-Briggs is all about. You know, there's introvert, extrovert.
Right.
And it's not that one is right and one is, but people get their energy in different
Yeah.
ways. You know, it sounds like your husband is an I.
Yes,
and
he's
you're
an
an E.
introvert, I'm an
You know,
extrovert.
and
That's not a surprise.
so is my, well, we're both introverts, but she's more extroverted. And we were on a trip actually once, so we were just going from house to house, just visiting all her friends for the first time. And I like had a breakdown on day 4. And it wasn't because we were doing too much. It was like, I've been around all these people all
Yeah.
the time. They're lovely people. I enjoy them.
Yeah.
But I need a night with just us.
Right.
And just but for somebody who thrives on that, it could be the total opposite. You know,
Yeah.
they maybe sit behind a cubicle all day and they want to be around people and be out in nature
Right.
or out in the world, and that's for them, that's life-giving. And so
And I think that I love the phrase you just said of life-giving, and the idea that we might need different things at different times in our life because the circumstances of our life might be different. You know, if you're sitting in a cubicle all day, well then I mean, depends on the office, but you probably haven't had as much exercise or social engagement versus if you're a community organizer who's driving around. You know, at this time in my life, often when I get home, I'm like, I don't want to talk to anyone. But it's not because I'm not social, it's because I've been social all day long.
Yeah.
And so thinking about like, what is the setup of our life at the moment, and what does that mean we need more of to feel whole? And what are the things that we want day to day, and what are the things that we want like once in a while? Because I realized for myself, like a lot of the things that I would want in a vacation, I've actually kind of built into my day-to-day life, which feels great. But it means that then on a vacation, like I want something that's different than that. Yeah.
and just talking about this, you know, we should affirm vacations.
Yes,
That
vacations.
The you know, the United States has one of the, compared to many other countries, an average of what, 2 weeks a year for many occupations, sometimes less.
Yeah.
And in other places, 6 to 8 weeks is typical. And yet the productivity isn't necessarily that much different. I don't remember if it was Google or some of these companies now are moving away from sort of set office hours and basically task-oriented. Your
Right.
job is to do this, and if you do that from here or from home, or if you come in at 8 a.m. or noon, or however you do it,
Right.
is up to you. And that they've found in many cases this, you would think it would lead to chaos, but it leads to better outcomes because people are tending to their needs. They're working in the way in which they are most creative and most comfortable, and it's like a net gain for everybody.
Yeah. I was hearing about that from someone who works at, maybe it's Microsoft, but they have a similar policy. And to me, it sounds really great. But one thing they've said is that a lot of times they have these policies now that you can take as much vacation as you want, like unlimited vacation. If you don't want to come in, you tell your supervisor, I'm not going to come in today. But apparently people are taking less vacation in some spaces because it's like the option is like, oh, I could do it. So then you don't do it. And so I think even in that situation, like it clearly that the heart is in the right place, but thinking about how do you be intentional? And my best friend who has the schedule of doing a million things, her husband got this science research job in Frankfurt, Germany. So she's now been living in Germany for the past couple of years. And there it's like, that women can get like 3 years of maternity leave, and people get 6 to 8 weeks of vacation. People work 9 to 5. She's a lawyer. She still has her practice. And people are like, I don't understand. Why are you working still? Like, what, did somebody torture you? And she's like, no, it's my job, passionate about it. You know, she really cares about her work. but it's seen as like crazy that because in their culture, work is something that you do, you know, it's like part of your life, it's something you do to pay the bills, but that's not what your life is about. Your life is what happens after work. And I don't know about you, but often if I go to a party, people are like, what's your name, whatever, what do you do?
Second question.
It's like right away, you know, versus like that's not the question that everyone asks in other countries.
Yeah. It's interesting that in some places in Europe, instead of saying vacation, they'll say holiday, which comes as holy day, really. It's, there's like, maybe it's just an etymological sort of coincidence, but to think that vacation is holy time.
Yeah.
It's a form of Sabbath, and that it's something that is necessary for us to be whole and well human beings.
You know, something that used to happen to me a lot is that when I would get to vacation, I would get the flu because I would work so hard that I'd be like, I just have to get to vacation. But my life was unsustainable. And so then I would get to vacation and I'd be like, my body would just say, okay, enough. And so to me, it also reminds me that like there's a value to vacation, but also part of it is it's a reminder to create lives that are whole and balanced enough that we're not desperate once we get there and broken down.
Well, they say the body keeps score, right?
Yes.
Of everything. I'm not seeing the producer, so I think we have a little more time to fill out here.
Yeah. What was the best vacation that you've been on?
That's a good question. I guess in recent memory, it hasn't been to an exotic location because I can't afford to go anywhere. But, you know, just going to visit friends who I haven't seen in a while. You know, I went out to Nebraska a few years ago to see a college friend, or to North Carolina, places that I don't normally go. And you get to see a new part of the country. You get to have just some quality one-on-one relational time. And you feel like that friendship, which maybe was neglected for a while, gets restored. And then you come back and it's been really great and fairly affordable usually. You're just paying for a plane ticket and not having.
Lovely.
I would love to go to the Holy Land. That's something I'll have to save up for, but I'm sure it won't be a relaxing trip. But, but it's been something I've been wanting to do for many years. What about you? Did your family vacation? We didn't really take vacations much as a kid because we didn't have lots of money, so my parents were teachers, so they had the summer off, so we had time together as a family, but we didn't take many trips.
Yeah, I think I had like a kind of exotic childhood in terms of traveling because my dad had a sort of international job. So for my dad's job, the main thing he would travel to London a lot, but at one point he traveled to Sydney, Australia, and we just went a lot, you know, for a while, not always, but for a while we would just sort of come along and just like stay wherever he was staying. And my dad was working, but my mom and my sister would just sort of explore the place, and that was really precious. And then with vacations, we pretty much spent all of our vacation time visiting my grandparents in Florida, which was like not interesting, but I loved it. I mean, my grandmother had the coolest friends. They were all best friends since they were Girl Scouts when they were like 10 years old, and they were all just really amazing older women and just like matriarchs of their various families, and as a little kid, I just loved following them around and, you know, doing whatever. They would sit by the pool and play Scrabble, or it wasn't anything like so exciting, but that's what we did. And then in the summers, we would go to this place, Screw Lake, which has these shabby cabins. It's like Jewish people, social workers and teachers and rabbis hang out in these shabby cabins, and that was great too. So our vacations were kind of low key, but I got to see some of the world through that traveling, through my dad, which was really exciting. and I think which created in me a sense of like the world is small and I should be able to see it, which is a very privileged perspective. I think for me, probably the most memorable and meaningful vacations have been in Israel, which just holds a really special place in my heart and is a complicated place politically, but one time I was working really, really, really hard while I was in rabbinical school, and then part of school for rabbis is you go and spend time in Israel. So I was sent over, and in comparison to my life in America, I felt like being in Israel was the easiest possible thing. Like, I just had to go to these classes, and I worked at an organization that was of Israelis because I wanted to just have a space to really practice Hebrew, and I took Hebrew classes. And then I would just like walk down the street, bless you. I walked down the street and run into people who were like, "Do you want to bake bread right now?" And I'd be like, "Okay." And we would just do random things and walk to the old city and walk around the R.U.A.C.H, which is this rambling marketplace with every kind of vegetable and biblical fruit and everything. And it just was like so relaxing to just live there. And obviously it was like, as an expat, it was kind of a fake existence, but that was incredibly restorative and rejuvenating to just realize that I could be a valuable human without really doing that much. And then about 3 years ago, my husband and I and my parents went to Israel, and we spent 2 weeks there, and we just didn't. I've been on a lot of these trips where it's like you go to the Dead Sea and you climb Masada and you go to you do all of this like list of touristy things, and I've done the list many times, so I just didn't feel the need. So we just stayed, and I have lots of friends there, and so we just like went and visited different people and prayed in these amazing singing communities and hung out at the Western Wall and at the market, and we went up to the Galilee, and we're just able to overlook the hills, and it was just incredibly relaxing and beautiful. And by the time we were done, we were ready to come home. Like, we had so little to do that by the time we were done, we were like, okay, that's good.
That's a good vacation.
Which is
when
like
you
the
know
best.
It's time to come home. Yeah.
Yeah, almost always it's like, oh, I don't want to leave yet. So that was really great.
One thing that just came to my mind is, as much as we're talking about this, sometimes faith communities can be the worst at burning people out.
Yes.
Who are volunteers. You know, the person who signs up to be treasurer for a 2-year term and is on their 20th year, the Sunday school teacher, the people who truly want to serve, but then get taken for granted or get asked to do so much that it stops being a fun thing or a life-giving thing, but turns into a resentment. How do you deal with that in your congregation? Because they say that this is not a unique thing. Like, usually 10% of the people do 80% of the work, you know. And so how do you have any sort of systems in place, or when someone comes to you and says, "Rabbi, I'm sick of doing this," what do you tell them? Or
well, first I want to just plead guilty that is true. You know, in my congregation, well, I think we've been successful in that, like, most people actually do something, which is not true at all communities. And I think that the key leadership feels overworked. And I feel like in ECHO, the Essex County Community Organization, that's where I've seen more success, that some people can feel overworked, but we're really trying to create structures of decentralization where no one person has too much, because if someone's doing too many things, we'll say, okay, well, let's think about what this set of tasks is, and can we create a team that's going to be responsible for it? And I also did that a lot in my the Jewish social justice community, Kavod House, that I founded, that's still very strong. That's a space where, yes, the leaders work a lot, but where we very intentionally expanded the board so that the core leader roles didn't have to hold as much. So I think a lot of it is about creating the structures and the systems of support, and to have really specific roles. So it's like, this is your role, this is not your role, you don't have to do these other things, and then create structure so that there's enough people. But I think part of it is that often, like, there isn't the community norm to have everyone do something, and so then there are these people that wind up being kind of martyrs who do everything and who may actually gain some satisfaction from being the community martyr that does everything. It's like, oh, no, I'll handle it. But you know they're going to do it.
Yeah.
And part of it is like, how do we honor that person, but say, like, it's not actually a good idea for you to do everything, because if we share the responsibilities, everyone will feel more bought in. And I feel like in my congregation, sometimes that's worked, and largely, people have busy lives, and so the few people that are willing to step up, everyone's really grateful for them, but they still wind up doing too much. And so I think it's a reminder to us as clergy or to anyone in the community that it doesn't actually make your congregation or your community stronger to be the one that does everything.
Yeah.
It's actually better to share the wealth. And the delegating is not pawning off your job because you don't care and you want to have everyone else do your own work, but it's actually sharing opportunities for ownership and responsibility. And that feels like a really important shift that allows everyone to have more rest and meaningful work.
Yeah. I think one of the most important shifts that we've had at my congregation in the last 10 years is seeing that new generation of leadership come on and giving a little bit of rest to the people who have served either as in a martyr sort of role or just in a very faithful, generous sort of role. But we're starting to feel like it was time to step back. With that, though, comes sometimes a culture shift, because the new people bring new ideas.
Yep.
But that's healthy. Part of sort of the life cycle is people that bring their new energy, bring their new ideas, and things change, and there's sometimes a little discomfort, but that's keeps you from stasis.
Yeah, it's interesting what you just said. I connect with that, and I feel like a lot of times congregations or like the leadership is like, we need new people, and then the new people come and they're like, well, we do things in a new way, and people are like, that is not the way we do it.
No. Why should I come and do things exactly the way that we do?
Right, and so there is a sense of like change includes loss, and so to be able to say like, okay, we want to rest more, but that means, or we want to share the wealth of work, and then that actually means also sharing power and control, and that if someone else is doing the work, like, you don't get to control what they do, and that can be hard. And I think that kind of goes back to, well, where are you deriving your own value from? And if all of it comes from that you're in charge, then it's really hard when you're not, and to understand like you're offering as service and not as status is important and so hard to be able to do.
Indeed. And sometimes the community practices, whatever, like the worship or something that draws us together aside from just keeping the institution going, can be, let's center around that. Let's connect around that. Maybe this is an hour show after all.
I don't know.
Margie.
I feel like it's still going.
Still going.
I thought we were going to be done, but I'm happy to be with our viewers even longer.
Absolutely.
Well, one thing we were thinking about talking about was nature.
Yes.
And the role of nature and rest. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's good for me to be in nature because I am by nature sort of an indoor. I like
indoor
air
kid.
conditioning. I don't like mosquito bites. I like I'm embarrassed to admit this, but one of the shows I've started to watch is this RV show where people, design and buy an RV. It's like, if I was going to go camping, I would want one of these Winnebago things with leather couches, and it's like, but when I get forced out and just leave the phone, it is good to be connected to just the beauty of the creation of the world, to lay under the sky. So you asked about my favorite vacation. This was probably one of my most stressful but important trips was the summer before I was ordained my two dear friends who are absolutely nature skinny dipping people took me out to this place in the Cascade Mountains where we stayed in a yurt.
Wait, where are the Cascades?
Out in Washington State.
Oh, okay.
And we had to like take a boat to a school bus up a mountain, and there was no connectivity at all. A place called Holden Village. It's a Lutheran sort of retreat center. And it was like a culture shock to me. And I was like, the first few days I was not having a good time. I was like, I have no connection to the outside world. I don't know what to do with myself. I like sat in the library reading. But then it started to melt away, and like we went on some hikes, and I sort of, I don't know what the word would be, but to not be, I felt more at one with the world. I think animals help too. You know, before I was a animal lover, pet owner, I don't know. I feel like having a dog and a cat in the house reminds me that there's this whole world of creatures and life that is separate from me and is lovable and essential. And it's changed some of my, you know, I've not become a vegan, but I pay attention to where the things I eat come from now, and humane practices, and I don't know, I think we can't see the earth as a commodity that we consume, because it's a limited resource. And you know, when I see things on the news about, let's get rid of the pollution regulations, you know, I just was like, what's the starting point for these things, for something like that? Let's stop paying attention to the water. It's mind-boggling to me, the short-sightedness that we sometimes have, that the earth is something that's bequeathed to us in trust to hold and then pass on to the next generation. And maybe the more time we spend in nature and appreciate it and see it as a gift, something that's alive, the more we will treat it with care and respect.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I grew up in New York City. It's like not, and my family like did not go camping, like ever. We never once went camping. Our biggest thing was going to these shabby cabins in the woods in the Adirondacks, which, I mean, had plumbing and a refrigerator, you know, and a grocery store. Like, it was not like really roughing it. And so I think I identify with what you're. I think I'm probably more comfortable in like home in people's homes than I am like out in the world. But I've also had a lot of experiences where I'm out of my comfort zone and I'm out in the world, and I just feel like it's like what you were saying, but I feel like a created being or something. Like I feel like I'm part of something much greater than myself. And sometimes, you know, living in New York City, it's like what's under New York City is like other versions of New York City, you know, it's just like all the way down. Versus if you are in some other places, it's like you can imagine what it was like a few hundred years ago and the Native Americans or whoever was there, and just what it would be like to live in that physical environment. And I love sort of feeling surrounded, and like I just love being in like the woods and walking and just feeling like sort of closed in upon, as long as I know how to get out again. But yeah, I appreciate that.
There was a story on NPR yesterday about visiting Antarctica and how it's very hard to do and very expensive, and that's good because we want to leave it as untouched as possible. But the people who go there say it's like the first experience I ever had of being in a place that's sort of untouched by humankind, and it was this overwhelming feeling of what you just said, of feeling like you're a creature, that you're part of this ecosystem, this life, and that they came back with this deep desire to advocate for taking care of the earth, because they were, you know, penguins are coming up to them, and it was like they were just part of the whole thing. It wasn't that humans are up here and everything else was down here. And it was life-changing for many of these people. And it's good for us to have those experiences. We have just a couple of minutes left, I'm told.
Well, one thing I'll say for, I think our viewers are in different stages of life
Yeah.
and different stages of mobility. And I think that one of the things, just like we were saying with rest, is like that there are so many different ways that we can interact with nature or interact with leisure time, and that it's important to know that you don't have to be able to climb a mountain
Absolutely.
to be able to appreciate it. I mean, even for myself, I just love I live in Jamaica Plain, and there's a pond right near my house, and I just try to, like, at least once a week, just walk around the pond, and it's wheelchair accessible, and so I take my daughter in her stroller around, and it's just a beautiful thing to be out in a park. And it's, it's not like the woods, but it's nice to just remember that there's things beyond what's human made. And so I hope that this summer or in the coming months, people have an opportunity both to rest and relax and also to be out in the beautiful world.
I agree. So a blessed time of rest and rejuvenation to everyone watching, in whatever way you find that peace, to know that your life matters and is essential and beautiful before you do any work, and no matter what kind of work you do, and that your life is sacred, as is the life we share together in this world.
Amen.
So blessings to you and to you.
Yes, and next time, everyone, I will probably have a baby by the next time I come back. So,
Can he or she come on the program?
we'll see about that.
Okay.
We'll see about that. It's going to be a boy, so we'll see if he's camera ready.
Okay. Have a wonderful week.